Imagine the paper smell of a government press in Berlin on 17 October 1939 as a decree moves through rollers. Members of the SS and police will answer to their own courts. A rubber stamp lands in red ink. A jurisdiction is severed from the ordinary judiciary. This is the hinge that makes specialized SS punishment camps possible, and it begins with punctuation on a page. What happens when a regime builds a courtroom for itself? From that sheet forward, crimes by SS men and uniformed police no longer float to public prosecutors or, for field units, to Wehrmacht courts. Authority consolidated under Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, with a supreme SS and police court at the apex and a lattice of SS unpolized beneath it. The SS Court main office, led by Franz Breithaupt, took custody of dockets, appointments, and procedure. The system adopted familiar legal furniture, warrants, indictments, panels, sentences, but kept it inside, where secrecy and cohesion counted more than public legitimacy. You track a finger across a jurisdiction map. Each higher SS and police leader district has its own court, each court its own jailers, each jailer a file drawer and a key. The new authority carried practical implications. A case of theft from a depot, a rape during a requisition, an unauthorized shooting at a checkpoint, all of it now bypassed civilian complaint channels and entered a closed circuit. The Wehrmacht's judiciary handled soldiers. The SS would handle the SS. The distinction was not academic. It meant that outcomes would be measured against operational priorities rather than civil order. Implementation followed by circular. Internal directives, dates in late 1939 and early 1940, appear in fragmentary logs, set out the categories of offense, the thresholds for court-martial versus disciplinary punishment, and the destinations for confinement. Short terms might be served in SS arrest facilities attached to training schools. Longer sentences required dedicated capacity. In administrative drafts, a term recurs. Strafvollzugsliger der SS und Polizei, penal execution camps of the SS and police. Within months, Matzkau near Danzig appears in correspondence. Later, Beneschau near Beneschau in Bohemia joins the ledger. The decree did not add mercy. It formalized a priority stack. Property of the state, secrecy of operations, and uninterrupted exploitation of labor outranked harm to civilians. When brutality surfaced in charge sheets, it was usually because it was unauthorized, conspicuous, or disruptive. A killing that foreclosed interrogation, a beating that cost a skilled prisoner's workday, a spree that attracted attention. The court language reflects it in dry terms: damage, disobedience, misuse of authority. Inside that vocabulary, a man could be too brutal for the Nazis only in the sense that his violence misaligned with orders. Case handling was orderly by design. A typed warrant slid from a district office to the SS Court main office. Investigators assembled statements and exhibits. A panel convened. The same pipeline that issued verdicts wrote transport orders. Prisons under SS control could not absorb the throughput alone, and the new penal camps answered the need. They were not the concentration camp universe, different mandate, different population, but they borrowed its architecture. Barbed wire barracks, roll calls, labor details, punishment cells. The difference lay in who wore which uniform. This architecture also created options. The separate law included the possibility of rehabilitation through service in Bewährungseinheit, probationary units. The files that would later assign men from Matzkau and Beneschau to high-risk formations traced back to this legal fork. Sentence remission became a line item. A train schedule to the front became the execution method deferred. Not all specifics are recoverable. Some implementing orders went up in smoke in 1945, and the precise number and locations of all SS und Polizeigerecht in each year vary by source. What remains nonetheless fixes the hinge. A Führer-level decree dated 17 October 1939, Himmler's jurisdiction thereafter, Breithop's office administering the process, and a network of courts that answered to the SS itself. From there, the chain links in steel and paper to gates at Danzig-Matzkau and Beneschau. You stand at the desk where the decree lies cooling, ink drying under a desk lamp. Outside, the city sounds normal. Trams, bicycles, boots on wet pavement. Inside the building, a jurisdiction has been redirected, and with it the fate of thousands of offenders who will never pass under a civilian judge's eye. The separate law is not an abstraction. It is timetables, cells, uniforms without insignia, and the quiet efficiency of an institution that decided to police itself. A stamp hits purple ink. A gate opens and closes on the edge of Danzig, at Matzkau, as the first batches of SS and police convicts arrive in late 1939, early 1940. The file marks the site as a Strafvollzugsliger der SS und Polizei, separate from civilian prisons, purpose-built to hold men under the SS police courts. Trucks idle, boots scrape frost from boards. The camp will become a feeder, not an endpoint. Which crimes root men here and which send them somewhere worse. On maps of the Free City and its annexed hinterland, Matzkau sits just south of Danzig proper, close enough for an escort truck to make the round trip without refueling. The camp's designation appears in SS correspondence by the turn of 1940, tying it to the legal channel created in October 1939. Jurisdiction ran through the SS Court main office. Regionally, it sat within the zone of the higher SS and police leader for Danzig, West Prussia. The purpose was precise. Hold SS and police personnel sentenced by SS und Polizeigericht and process them under SS rules, not the civilian penal code. It was a prison built to maintain an organization's discipline, not to reform its men. Intake was standardized. You move past a wooden table where a clerk records name, rank, unit, offense category, and sentence length in a ledger whose lines run in fracture type on pre-printed forms. Personal effects and sidearms are removed. Rank for camp purposes is suspended. Authority inside the wire belongs to the guard detail and the camp commandant's office. The offenses listed in surviving rosters are administrative in tone: theft of state property, embezzlement, extortion, rape, looting, unauthorized shootings, desertion. The selection mechanism is mechanical. Lesser terms route to arrest cells attached to training schools such as at Dachau. Substantial sentences land here. Cases judged suitable for probationary front service are flagged for later transfer. The layout followed a repeatable model. Perimeter wire strung between posts, watchtowers at the corners, a gatehouse with a logbook, and rows of wooden barracks with tarred roofs. Inside, an Appellplatz organized roll calls, and beyond it were sheds for tools and a kitchen that smelled of boiled turnips and carbolic. Work details left under guard at first light and returned by dusk. Labor fed nearby SS and police construction and earthworks. Roads, drainage, trenching, and maintenance on facilities that supported the region's security apparatus. Exact daily tasking is incomplete in the surviving paperwork. What is consistent is the emphasis on physical labor under time pressure. Discipline matched the legal intent. Punishments inside Matzkau included standing arrests, reduced rations, beatings, and confinement in dark cells. Regulations curtailed correspondence and visits. The men were not inmates of a concentration camp in the sense of Stutthof, which lay to the east. They were convicted members of the apparatus serving penal sentences under its own command. The separation of categories did not soften conditions. It simply kept them inside the SS system. Matzkau's second function, evident by 1943, was as a routing point. When manpower demands rose, probationary service in Bewährungseinheiten became an administrative exit. Files indicate that contingents moved from penal custody to high-risk formations by rail, often with sentence remission promised upon survival. Documentation from wartime and post-war sources ties the broader network of SS penal custody to units such as SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 500. Whether a given draft at Matzkau was bound for that specific battalion or for other ad hoc assault and mine-clearing details is not always clear in the remaining records. The logic stands even where names are missing. The camp fed labor locally and men to the front. Numbers are difficult. Ledgers do not survive in full. Many administrative files were burned as Soviet forces neared Danzig in early 1945. References in post-war Polish and German archival inventories confirm the camp's function and continuity through the war years, but comprehensive inmate totals and monthly throughputs remain unknown. What emerges nonetheless is a consistent silhouette. An SS and police penal facility operating from the first winter of the war until the last spring, tied by paper and rail to courts, work details, and probationary drafts. You stand at the gatehouse window as a stamp lands and the barrier lifts. The entries in the log are terse: a unit designation, a sentence, a destination code for labor or transfer. The truck grinds forward toward the barracks. Another truck idles behind it. Matzkau does not end the story of an SS conviction. It assigns the next phase: a shovel on a frozen road, a pick in a gravel pit, or a place on a train that will carry a man out under orders that promise freedom only if he comes back alive. You run your finger down a roster: Rottenführer, Scharführer, and Obersturmführer or two, entries for theft, rape, embezzlement, unauthorized shootings, desertion. The classifications are administrative, devoid of sentiment, but they decide whether a man sees a cell, a quarry, or a minefield. The categories link back to the decree and forward to the work details at Matzkau. What is not recorded in these sheets is motive. The record keeps only charge and disposition. The paper is thin, duplicated with carbon sheets, margins punched for a file prong. Columns march across. Name, date of birth, rank, parent unit, offense category, sentence, place of confinement, remarks. A clerk's pencil adds ticks for transfers and a diagonal stroke when a man exits the list. You see repetition more than variety. NCO ranks dominate. A handful of company-grade officers appear, usually with property crimes or abuse of authority. The handwriting shifts from neat to hurried where transports come in bulk, each new batch compressed into the same grid. The offense terms form a lexicon of institutional priorities. Theft from depots, embezzlement from pay chests, and fraud against the state or party organizations recur. Extortion during requisition, looting outside sanctioned seizures, rape and sexual assault, and unauthorized shootings show up as well. Desertion and prolonged absence from duty, refusal to obey orders, and armed insubordination appear more often as the war grinds on. Acts against civilians register only when they jeopardize secrecy, labor output, or command intent. The language is spare: a noun for the offense, a number for the months or years. Dispositions map the system's pathways. Short terms are rooted to SS arrest facilities at training schools, especially Dachau, where men endure drill and menial labor under confinement. Longer sentences are assigned to Danzig-Matzkau, or, later, to Beneschau in Bohemia. Some entries carry a notation for probationary service, flagged for transfer to a front-line formation when manpower orders call. The same sheet that records a conviction can also be a ticket to a minefield. You trace a line from offense to outcome and see logistics underneath: a railway siding, a guard detachment, a receiving gate. The remarks column carries the life cycle in shorthand: transferred to penal custody, arrived, assigned to work detail. Later, a second hand adds released upon completion, reassigned to unit, evacuated, or transferred for probation. In 1944-45, fallen in action appears more often, a postscript to a line that began with a sentence. There are other endings too: shot during escape attempt, a wartime regulation written as a phrase and a date. The roster never says where, only that it happened and that the name no longer belongs in the active count. Names of victims never appear. The sheets are blind to anyone not under SS jurisdiction. Even the accused are reduced to administrative silhouettes. A man who extorted food at gunpoint becomes a code for extortion with an allotted term. A man who killed without orders becomes unauthorized shooting, months or years, sometimes death. The abstraction is deliberate. These documents serve transport clerks and camp offices, not historians or courts to come. They keep the system moving, courts to cells, cells to labor, labor to the front. Patterns do emerge. Property crimes are pursued early and consistently. Corruption threatens supply chains and authority. Unauthorized brutality spikes where it threatens output or creates scandal. Desertion grows as the fronts collapse. The rank distribution clusters where control is tightest, among guards, depot staffs, and field police units. High-profile commandants typically sit outside these lists, held in separate custody pending proceedings in higher SS courts. The rosters from penal camps are mostly the middle and lower tiers, the men most easily pulled, punished, and redeployed. Not every sheet survived. Evacuations in early 1945 brought bonfires to yard corners. Many ledgers and intake books vanished. What remains sits in Polish, Czech, and German archives, often as fragments. An intake page without a matching discharge, a transport list without the receiving camp's acknowledgement. Even broken, they tell the same story. You can read the institution's mind in columns and codes, not because it explains itself, but because the repetition exposes priorities. The roster decides the fork in the road. A bunk in a barracks outside Danzig, a gravel pit in Bohemia, or a place in a probationary file that translates a sentence into risk under fire. You ride in the escort truck past the station at Beneschau, southeast of Prague, as a sign reads Beneschau. The convoy slides toward another SS and police penal facility, active by 1942-43. The terrain is rolling and wooded, suited to an SS training area. The penal camp feeds labor into it. Overcrowding and operational demand push this expansion beyond Danzig. The same legal pipeline, another gate and ledger. Beneschau sits roughly 40 kilometers from Prague on a main rail line, a logistical advantage for a system that moves men by schedule. In SS paperwork, it appears inside the security zone of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, under the reach of the higher SS and police leader for Bohemia-Moravia. The designation repeats the pattern set at Matzkau. Strafvollzugsslager der SS und Polizei Beneschau, a penal execution camp intended for SS and police personnel sentenced by SS courts. The proximity to the SS training grounds around Beneschau made it ideal for controlled labor. The intake routine follows the template. A truck rolls under the gate, a guard detail orders dismount, a clerk enters name, rank, unit, offense category, sentence, and origin court into a ledger. Rank carries little weight inside. The guard roster controls movement, work, and punishment. Offenses mirror those seen elsewhere. Theft and embezzlement from depots and pay chests, extortion during requisitions, rape and sexual assault, looting beyond orders, unauthorized shootings, desertion, and prolonged absence. Short sentences could be handled at arrest cells attached to training schools. Beneschau takes the longer terms and the men flagged for hard labor. The camp's physical plan is utilitarian. Perimeter wire, corner towers, a gatehouse with a logbook and a stamp pad, a roll call square, barracks of timber and tar paper. A tool shed holds shovels, picks, pry bars, and saws. The kitchen smells of cabbage and disinfectant. At first light, work details step off toward the SS training area. Tasks in the files are practical and repetitive. Road grading, drainage ditching, timber clearing, earthworks for ranges, laying rail spurs and constructing sheds and huts. Day-by-day quotas are not preserved in full. What survives emphasizes speed, output, and discipline. Disciplinary measures match the legal frame. Standing arrests, reduced rations, corporal punishment, and confinement in dark cells appear in regulations and post-war references. Correspondence is limited. Visits are rare and controlled. The men here are not concentration camp prisoners in the civilian victim sense. They are uniformed SS and police under sentence, held within their institution's walls. The separation of categories does not alter the coercion or the labor demanded. It keeps the process opaque. By 1943-44, Beneschau's ledgers begin to echo a second function: routing for probationary service. Notations mark men for Bewährung, probation, pending transport orders. When manpower calls rise, drafts move by rail to front-line duties with high casualty risk, including mine clearing, assault reconnaissance, or ad hoc battle groups. Surviving documents tie the broader SS penal network to probationary formations. Whether a specific Beneschau draft fed a particular unit is often untraceable in the fragmentary record. The mechanism is clear even where names are missing. A sentence becomes risk under fire. As the war turns in 1945, the area shakes under converging fronts. Evacuation orders reach the camp. Files are thinned or burned. Columns form. Some inmates are absorbed into last-ditch formations in the protectorate. Others are marched out under guard. Specific rosters of these movements are incomplete or lost. What remains in Czech and German archives anchors the camp's existence, purpose, and integration into the SS disciplinary machine. You watch the escort sign the receipt in the gatehouse and hand back the clipboard. A typed warrant from an SS court brought these men here. Another order may send them on again, to a gravel pit or a rail siding or a frontline detail stamped probation. The same paperwork that built Beneschau's fence also keeps its doors turning. Who initials the transfer that decides whether a sentence ends in labor or in a casualty report? A typed warrant slides across a desk stamped SS unpolized. The name Franz Breithaupt appears on organizational charts as chief of the SS Court main office, and Georg Conrad Morgan as an investigating judge. Files travel to holding cells and then to Matzkau or Beneschau. Jurisdictional separation means the Wehrmacht courts do not touch these men. Their punishments are internal. What does accountability mean when it never leaves the institution? From the warrant outward, the process is codified. A district SS and police court issues the arrest order. A guard detail executes it. Pretrial confinement follows in SS-controlled cells. The docket moves under the eye of the SS court main office in Berlin. Breithaupt's bureau standardizing formats, deadlines, and venues. Panels of SS judges, legal officers in uniform, hear cases against SS and police personnel under a penal code tailored to service offenses, property crimes, and breaches of discipline. Appeals, where allowed, climb to the Oberst SS und Polizeigericht, the Supreme SS and Police Court. The latter ends inside the same building that raised it. Evidence collection mirrors ordinary criminal procedure but sits within SS networks. You follow a file, a unit commander's report, an audit sheet from the WV2 when property is missing, sworn statements from guards or clerks, sometimes forensic notes when a killing must be matched to a weapon. Morgan's name appears where investigations touch camp command staffs or complex corruption. His remit in 1943-44 sent him through Buchenwald, Majdanek, and Plasso. He documented embezzlement, extortion, and unauthorized killings connected to concealment of theft. His reach is recorded. His limits are too. Cases that threatened to expose the larger machinery of extermination often stalled or were redirected. Sentencing options reflect the system's priorities. Lesser offenses draw confinement in SS arrest facilities attached to training schools, demotion, or fines. Heavier cases bring years in penal custody at Danzig-Matzkau or Beneschau, expulsion from the SS, or for desertion, severe corruption, and certain categories of murder-death. A separate channel emerges in wartime: probationary combat service. Men under sentence can be reassigned to Bewährung under orders that promise remission upon survival. Paperwork turns a judicial term into a tactical risk allocation. After the verdict, Transport is administrative and swift. A clerk prepares a delivery order naming the receiving facility. The man is handed to an escort section. His personal effects are sealed. The same forms carry transfer notes when probationary service is ordered, destination unit, report date, and a liaison office to receive the detachment. In many cases, a short stop at a local holding cell precedes the rail move to Matzkau or Beneschau. The record shows a loop that never opens to civilian view. Courts, jails, and trains all wear the same insignia. The legal separation from the Wehrmacht matters in subtle ways. Army courts do not process these files, and civilian courts do not see them at all. Where Army law might emphasize battlefield cohesion, SS law emphasizes secrecy and property protection as well. The charge language in indictments returns to those points. Misappropriation, misuse of authority, damaging party or state assets, disobedience with operational consequences. Violence against prisoners or civilians appears as a case mainly when it is unauthorized or threatens efficiency. Authorized brutality does not cross the courtroom threshold. Records carry gaps, some by design, others by fire. Implementing directives and regional court logs are incomplete for 1945. Evacuation burnings in Danzig, Krakow, and Prague left holes. Even so, surviving dockets, transport orders, and post-war testimony trace the arc from desk to gate. You can ride the paperwork. A stamp at a district court, a receipt at a holding cell, an entry in the intake book at Matzkau, a later notation routing a man into a probationary draft. Stand at the corridor where files pass from clerk to judge to escort. The noise is muted. Pages, keys, boot heels. The men who enter this system do not exit into civilian custody. They flow to cells, to labor, or to the front under a different kind of sentence. Outside, rain needles a parade ground at a training school. Inside, a delivery order is signed that will send a column from the arrest block to a penal company within earshot of drill whistles, and from there, for some, farther still. Rain needles the parade ground at Dachau as the bell sounds, and an SS penal company forms separately from the trainees. The guard school here runs arrests and internal punishments in parallel with the concentration camp next door. A small arrest building takes in its own. Not all SS punishments mean transfer to Matzkau. Some are served under the same barbed wire where the men trained. Which infractions you commit determines whether you carry a shovel here or a rifle somewhere else. The Dachau complex was a garrison as much as it was a camp. Barracks blocks, motor pools, workshops, a rail spur, and beyond the wire, the prisoner compound with its own administration. Training cadres for guard units rotated through the Standort. The firing range at Hebertshausen lay a few kilometers away. Within this footprint, an SS arrest facility handled short sentences under internal regulations. Surviving regulations and post-war accounts describe stricter drill, fatigue duties, and cell confinement as standard penalties. Exact cell counts and floor plans are not consistently preserved in the record. The proximity of training, incarceration, and mass detention was not incidental. It reduced transport, kept discipline in-house, and reinforced the message that punishment would be handled under the same insignia that handed out orders. Assignment to Dachau's internal penal company followed a familiar logic. Minor or intermediate infractions, drunkenness on duty, misuse of vehicles or equipment, insubordination short of mutiny, absence without leave measured in days, and certain categories of assault or theft deemed less severe, drew confinement and labor under the eyes of the same instructors who graded drill. Men remained in uniform but stripped of privileges. Rank was suspended for the duration of the penalty. For heavier offenses or longer sentences, the paperwork pointed to Danzig-Matzkau or, later, Beneschau. The docket, not the man, determined whether the gate opened to the arrest block or to a transport truck. Daily routine inside the SS arrest system differed from prisoner punishment in the concentration camp's bunker. Reveille sounded early. Formations stood in separate ranks from trainees. Fatigue details filled the day, hauling coal, repairing fences and roads inside the garrison, cleaning latrines, loading supplies, and other maintenance that kept the standard functioning. Drill intensified in off hours, marching under load, weapons handling without live fire, inspections. Meals were basic and sometimes reduced under disciplinary rules. Correspondence and visits were restricted, passes were rare. Records note bread and water days under strict arrest in some periods, though exact schedules vary and are not fully documented for every year. Discipline inside the penal company followed a chart of punishments approved under SS regulations. Standing arrest, dark cell confinement, and corporal punishment appear in references to internal discipline. The paperwork tone is clinical: hours, days, and notations of compliance or further breach. A man could complete his sentence and return to his unit, remain under observation, or, if conduct failed to improve, be recommended for court proceedings that would route him to Matzkau or Beneschau. The internal ladder did not require a change of venue at the first step. It allowed the organization to escalate penalties as needed. The geography of the place mattered. The rail station at Dachau lay within marching distance. Stores and depots sat on the same grid as the arrest block. The concentration camp's prisoner population labored under a different regime and for different ends, yet the physical adjacency made clear how the SS layered its functions. An instructor could pass from a drill field to an arrest inspection, and then to guard duty on the prisoner perimeter without leaving the garrison. The administrative files reflect that continuity. Memo headings shift, but the signatories repeat. There are limits to what can be reconstructed. The Dachau Memorial Site and regional archives hold references to SS arrest facilities and penal duties for SS personnel, but comprehensive rosters of the penal company, complete punishment logs, and architectural plans for the arrest building are incomplete or lost, especially for 1945. What remains still fixes the structure. Short sentences served on site, with labor and drill as instruments of punishment. Longer or repeated offenses escalated to the penal camps in Danzig or Bohemia. And in wartime, the ever-present fork that sent some men from confinement to probationary combat details. You stand under the eaves as the rain comes harder, watching two formations divide. Trainees to the range, penal men to the tool shed. A sergeant checks a clipboard, initials beside names, and a small group peels off toward the rail spur with handcarts. The choice between a week in arrest and a rail ticket to a penal camp is administrative, not moral. Who signs the paper that keeps a man on this parade ground, and who signs the one that sends him to Matzkau remains in the same office, under the same crest. You flip a cover sheet labeled embezzlement. The notes emphasize property loss, disruption of labor, and unauthorized violence that creates administrative risk. The SS judicial file language shows priorities: discipline, secrecy, efficiency. The system punishes but not for humanitarian reasons. This matters for the men sent to penal camps. Their path is about control, not conscience. Turn a few pages and the pattern repeats. Exhibits include audit sheets from the SS economic apparatus, inventory discrepancy forms from depots, and summaries of work stoppages in factories tied to camp labor. Where a killing appears, it is framed as unauthorized use of force or concealment of theft, not as a crime against humanity. A notation that a skilled prisoner could not report for work because of injury, a missing crate of boots, a siphoned drum of fuel. These are the triggers that drive charges up the chain. The vocabulary is administrative and relentless. Misappropriation, misuse of authority, disobedience with operational consequences. Discipline is the organizing principle. Desertion, prolonged absence from duty, and insubordination threaten cohesion. Penalties accelerate as the war intensifies. Secrecy runs a close second. Unauthorized shootings outside cordoned areas, drunken displays of violence in occupied towns, and scandals that pull civilian attention are flagged because they expose the organization. Efficiency, the third leg, is measured in output, tonnage moved, hours worked, schedules kept. The courts enforce that triad. Where brutality aligns with policy, it does not appear in the docket. Where it undermines the triad, it becomes a case file. This explains why the same institution that built extermination sites prosecuted theft and corruption with severity. Investigative judges such as Georg Conrad Morgan assembled cases when embezzlement and murder converged, as at Buchenwald under Karl Otto Koch, whose execution by the SS in April 1945 followed charges centered on fraud and killings undertaken to hide it. Ammengurth's arrest by SS authorities in 1944 likewise flowed from theft and extortion findings. In each instance, the offense to be punished was not the regime's violence, but the breach of its internal order and the diversion of its property. Penal custody implements the sentence as a management tool. Short terms at Dachau's arrest facility mean drill, fatigue duty, and isolation under the same instructors who grade recruits. Longer terms move to Danzig-Matzkau or Beneschau, where labor details support SS infrastructure. Roads, drainage, timber clearing, and construction linked to nearby training grounds and police installations. The conditions are coercive by design, with restricted correspondence, curtailed visits, and a graduated chart of punishments for breaches inside the camp. None of this is aimed at rehabilitation in the social sense. It is aimed at reasserting control over personnel and extracting utility during the penalty. Wartime pressures add a fourth instrument: probationary deployment. Bewährung, probation, appears in margin notes as a route out of custody into hazardous service. The offer is calculable, not compassionate. When headcounts at the front fall, a draft order lifts flagged names from penal rosters and sends them to mine clearing, assault reconnaissance, or specialized formations such as SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 500. Sentence remission is the promised outcome, contingent on survival. The file logic is consistent. The organization converts a legal liability into battlefield risk. What the documents omit is as important as what they include. Victims' names and injuries are largely absent. The files are blind to the human cost beyond its impact on schedules and secrecy. Even the offenders are reduced to codes and durations. The absence is not an archival accident. It reflects the system's purpose. These papers were created to move men between desks, cells, barracks, and deployment lists without stepping outside institutional custody. They succeeded. Civilian courts saw none of it. Wehrmacht courts handled other uniforms. Gaps remain. Implementing circulars from regional courts are incomplete, and evacuation burnings in 1945 erased parts of the record in Danzig and Bohemia. Yet the surviving warrants, dockets, camp regulations, and transport orders allow the structure to be seen clearly. The priorities on the cover sheet, discipline, secrecy, efficiency, predict the sentence and the destination. You set the file down and the path is already visible. A barracks at Dachau, a work gang at Beneschau, a rail car east with a typewritten line that reads probation, to be struck through only if the man returns. A draft order moves across a staff table, allocating punishers and probationers to a frontline unit. A margin note mentions SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 500. Probationary service promises rehabilitation through high-risk missions. The transport lists show men pulled directly from penal custody. The route runs from a gate at Matzkau or Beneschau to a train siding and then to a drop zone or a mine belt. Whose sentence gets canceled depends on survival. The mechanism is administrative before it is tactical. Court files that ended with months or years in penal custody often carry a second notation in the remarks column: probation recommended upon manpower need. When that need arrives, a circular from the SS Court main office authorizes transfers. Camp commandants at Matzkau or Beneschau detail an escort, and a roster of names moves by rail to a designated depot. The men remain in SS uniform, stripped of rank for the duration, and enter a Bewährungseinheit, a probationary formation, where sentence remission is conditional on hazardous service. Exact thresholds for remission vary by case and period. The promise is consistent, written as remission upon successful completion or struck through by a casualty entry. Logistics bind the promise to the field. You step onto a platform where a mixed draft guards punished for theft, drivers for drunken wrecks, NCOs for extortion or unauthorized shootings, assembles under an escort sergeant. A chalked code on a G10 freight wagon matches the movement order. The train runs south toward the SS training grounds in Bohemia, where instructors drill the drafts hard. And for the airborne route, Luftwaffe cadres teach exits from Ju-52 doors and glider embarkation into DFS 230s. Equipment lists are standardized. Carbines, submachine guns, machine gun teams with MG-34 or MG-42, demolition charges for assigned assault tasks. The files tie the intake to the training area around Beneschau. From there, units like SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 500 assemble. SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 500, formed in 1943, is the most documented SS probationary outlet. Contemporary and post-war sources agree that a significant portion of its strength came from men under sentence or disciplinary sanction, alongside volunteers. On 25 May 1944, during Operation Wurselsprung, elements of the battalion executed an airborne and glider assault on DR Var in Bosnia, seeking to seize Josip Broz Tito. The paratroopers and glider teams, led on the ground by company-grade officers including Kurt Ribke, landed under fire and in scattered drops around the town and cemetery. Casualties were heavy, and the objective failed. The mission did not capture Tito. For probationers in the ranks, the administrative calculus played out in blood and in ledger ink. Some names were followed by fallen in action, others by wounded, missing, or returned to duty with sentence remitted. The battalion's survivors regrouped later in 1944. A redesignation to SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 600 followed, with a changing composition that included men who had completed probation as well as new drafts. Beyond the airborne path, other probationary assignments were more prosaic and more lethal. Mine-clearing screens pushed ahead of infantry columns, assault reconnaissance in river crossings, and ad hoc Kampfgruppen formed for crisis points on the Eastern Front. Orders from late 1943 onward show penal drafts routed east for such duty. The work translated a court sentence into statistical risk, measured not in days served, but in the probability of returning from a field strewn with pressure plates and tripwires. Paperwork tracked the outcomes with the same brevity it used to impose them. In camp ledgers and court files, a clerk would add a final line months later: sentence remitted after probationary service, rejoined parent unit. More often as the war turned, the line read killed in action, date and location if known, or missing. Some entries show expulsion from the SS after completion, a separate administrative end for cases where the organization chose not to restore status. The men who survived and were remitted disappear back into unit roles. Those who did not remain as a cross stroke through a name in a penal camp ledger. This channel from cell to front did not operate in isolation. Alongside airborne probation and mine-clearing details, the SS fed convicts and penal recruits into anti-partisan formations notorious for sanctioned violence. The boundary between punishment and weaponization narrowed as manpower thinned. The next roster shows where that logic led when an entire unit was built to burn through men other formations would not keep. A railcar door slams. A mixed detachment of convicts and recruited criminals is delivered to SS Sonderkommando Durlwanger, later the 36th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS. Documentation shows multiple streams feeding it, including judicial prisons and general prisons. Records are uneven on which specific men came from which SS penal camps. The unit's operations in Belarus and Warsaw are emblematic of sanctioned brutality. The boundary between punishment and weaponization blurs. The formation begins small in 1940-41 as a special detachment under Oskar Dirlewanger, initially drawing on convicted poachers released for service and guarded by SS cadres. Over the next years it grows by accretion. Drafts from judicial prisons, releases from concentration camp custody, and transfers of men deemed expendable by other units. Wartime files and post-war testimony concur on the mixed composition. Exact proportions for any given intake are unknown. The paper trail names the unit as SS Sonderkommando Dirlewanger, then SS Sturmbrigade Dirlewanger by mid-1944, and finally the 36th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS in 1945, as the front collapses and headcounts are inflated by emergency levies. The logistics are plain. You stand beside a siding as a guard detachment hands over a roster to a receiving officer. Surnames, birth years, offense categories, previous custody. Equipment lists are utilitarian. Carabiner 98K rifles, MP-40 submachine guns, MG-34 or MG-42 machine guns, a few light mortars and demolition charges. Trucks carry the unit along sand and forest tracks into rear area operations under higher SS and police leaders, often in coordination with Ordnungspolizei battalions and security divisions. Orders use the vocabulary of Bandenbekämpfung, bandit fighting, and tie the unit to sweeps, cordon and search, and village clearances. In Belarus during 1942-43, including operations such as Cottbus in May-June 1943, Dirlewanger's formation participates in actions that combine anti-partisan tactics with mass violence against civilians. Encirclements, house burnings, shootings, and deportations. Reports list weapons expended, bodies counted, and property seized. They read like production summaries. The men filling these columns include convicts whose sentences have been converted into field service. Whether a particular name boarded a train from Matzkau or Beneschau is not always recoverable in the surviving records. The structural connection remains visible in the system's willingness to turn penal populations into manpower for atrocity-heavy assignments. In Warsaw, August 1944, the unit is thrown into the city under SS Gruppenführer Heinz Rienefarth as the uprising begins. Alongside police and SS formations, Dirlewanger's brigade advances through the Wola district. Contemporary German records and post-war investigations fix the unit's role in large-scale killings of civilians during the first days of the battle. Here, the probationary fiction collapses entirely. A punishment cadre functions as an instrument of terror within an officially sanctioned operation, its earlier legal origins relevant only as a recruitment method. The pathway that ran from a warrant to a penal gate now feeds a front-line perpetrator unit. The ledger logic persists. Sentence remitted upon service for those who survive, expulsion or death for others. In late 1944 and early 1945, as the brigade is expanded on paper into a division, drafts include remnants from prisons, penal details, and ad hoc musters. The quality of records deteriorates as evacuation burnings and retreats multiply. What can still be traced links internal discipline to external brutality, not as an aberration but as an administrative choice. You close the movement order, and the ink has smudged at the bottom where rain touched it on the platform. A file that began in a courtroom ends in a neighborhood set alight. The next dossier in the stack, labeled investigation, follows a different vector. When theft and murder to conceal theft strike the SS-owned supply lines, the same judiciary that fed Dirlewanger opens a trial book and writes a death sentence for one of its commandants. A transfer slip bears the name Karl Otto Koch, former commandant at Buchenwald and Majdanek, under investigation for theft, fraud, and the murder of prisoners to conceal embezzlement. Arrests in 1943 lead to SS judicial proceedings, and on 5 April 1945, as U.S. forces near Weimar, Koch is executed by the SS. His case shows the ceiling of SS internal justice. Theft and corruption can be capital crimes. The brutality that was routine remains unpunished. The unauthorized profit does not. You open a personnel file and track Koch's postings. He served in the early concentration camp system, and in July 1937, took command as Buchenwald opened on the Ettersberg above Weimar. In 1940, he transferred to KL Lublin-Majdanek, a camp embedded in the machinery of occupation and extermination in the general government. By 1942-43, irregularities flagged by audits and reports from within the SS apparatus brought his name to the attention of the SS Court Main Office, and investigating Judge Georg Conrad Morgan. The charge constellation formed around embezzlement of prisoner property, fraud in procurement, and killings tied to the concealment of theft. The paper trail carries the fingerprints of the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, WW2, under Oswald Pohl. Audit sheets and depot ledgers note shortfalls and unexplained transfers. Seized items and cash are tracked to private accounts or unreported caches. Where the embezzlement met murder, the files record prisoners killed to silence witnesses. Testimony and post-war findings identify victim categories that included prisoner medics and functionaries at Buchenwald, who were positioned to know about Koch's personal misconduct and diversions. Specific names appear in later proceedings. Exact dates and on-site documentation are incomplete, a gap amplified by deliberate destruction of records in 1945. Morgan's remit, expanded in 1943, brought him into Buchenwald and then into Lublin. He conducted searches, seized documents, and ordered arrests. Koch was detained by SS authorities that year. His wife Ilse was also arrested during the investigation, but not convicted by the SS courts. The case against Koch moved through internal channels, with the Supreme SS and Police Court at the apex. The procedural language is dry. Misappropriation of state and party property, abuse of authority, and instigation or commission of murder for purposes of concealment. The human material is buried under stamps, signatures, and exhibit numbers. Venue details for the principal trial phases vary by source. Records are fragmentary after evacuations and burnings. What is settled is the sequence. A formal SS judicial process ending in a death sentence for Koch, carried out on 5 April 1945 as American forces closed on Weimar. He held SS rank of Standartenführer. The sentence stripped insignia and reduced him to a convict within his own institution. Whether the execution took place inside Buchenwald's precincts or at a nearby facility is recorded differently in surviving accounts. The fact of the execution, the date, and the SS jurisdiction are not in dispute. The rationale visible in the files is consistent with the system's priorities. Koch's ordinary brutality as a camp commandant, selections, punishments, the running of a site where countless prisoners were worked, starved, and beaten to death, did not constitute the core of the case. What brought the formal death sentence were theft and scandal that threatened the SS property regime and secrecy, and murders judged to serve concealment rather than policy. Internal justice policed order, not atrocity. When atrocity served order, it lay outside the courtroom door. Buchenwald was liberated 6 days later, on 11 April 1945. The timing gives the case a stark contour. The SS executed one of its own for corruption, as its wider system collapsed. U.S. forces found the camp intact enough to inventory. Post-war trials and memorial work would reconstruct, through surviving papers and testimonies, how an internal purge intersected with the broader machinery of extermination. Ilse Koch emerged in these post-war proceedings. She was tried by U.S. military courts in 1947 and by a West German court in 1951-52, separate tracks from the SS 1943 action. You set the dossier down and look at the next file tab. The same investigating judge's name recurs, this time in Krakow, where a commandant who terrorized a forced labor camp is taken into SS custody on charges of theft and extortion. The pattern holds. When property and secrecy are at risk, the institution that built the camps turns inward with handcuffs. A guard ledger in Krakow marks September 1944. Amon Girth, commandant of the Krakow Plazo camp, is arrested by SS authorities for theft, extortion, and misuse of state property. The evidence comes through Conrad Morgan's investigations. Girth is held while the case proceeds. War overtakes the process. Girth is handed to Allied custody after Germany's collapse and tried in Poland in 1946. The SS arrest still marks a limit line. Egregious, unauthorized profit draws handcuffs. You trace Girth's path in the files. Appointed to Plazo in February 1943, he presided as the site expanded from a forced labor camp into a concentration camp under WW2 oversight in 1944. The charge language that accumulates against him fits the SS legal lexicon: misappropriation of state and party property, extortion during requisitions, and enrichment through the diversion of valuables seized from Jews. Morgan's investigation reaches into the commandant's office and villa. Inventories list furs, jewelry, cash, and furnishings suspected to have been siphoned from property streams that were supposed to flow into state depots. Where witnesses threaten to expose theft, the files suggest killings connected to concealment, a convergence that had already led to capital charges in other cases. Procedure is visible in the paper. An arrest order issues from the district SS and police court. A custody receipt is signed. Girth is removed from command in September 1944 and replaced by SS Hauptsturmführer Arnold Bücher. The dossier travels upward toward the Supreme SS and police court. Some particulars are unknown. Not all pretrial confinement locations are documented, and portions of the Krakow court logs for late 1944-45 are missing. What remains shows an internal case moving through SS channels for property crimes serious enough to threaten the organization's control of loot and supply. Seizure lists bear the imprint of WW2 audits. Property ledgers from 1944 flag discrepancies between registered confiscations and deliveries to official repositories. Morgan's team ties missing items to rooms in Girth's residence and to unauthorized sales. The tone of the exhibits is arid and exact. Weights of gold, numbers of watches, amounts of foreign currency, serial numbers of confiscated arms. The people from whom these items were taken are largely absent as names. Their existence appears only as an entry in a depot book and a balance that does not reconcile. The SS case does not reach a verdict before the front arrives. In May 1945, Girth is in Allied hands. In 1946, he stands before the Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow. There, the charge sheet widens to crimes against humanity and wartime crimes committed at Plazo. He is convicted and executed on 13 September 1946 at Montelupich prison. The earlier SS arrest remains a document of institutional priorities. Theft and scandal provoked action. Authorized terror did not. You lift the folder and catch another name repeating across regions: Morgan's. His post-war depositions will attempt to map the scope of these internal inquiries, Buchenwald, Majdanek, Plazo, and to explain what could be pursued and what could not. How far did one investigating judge reach inside a system designed to keep its own secrets? You open a post-war deposition under archival light. Morgan describes raids, searches, and arrests inside the SS world during 1943-1944. He claims a large number of investigations. Exact figures are disputed. The list includes camp command staff across the system, with cases proceeding to trial or stalling as the war turns. The investigating machinery touches Buchenwald, Majdanek, and Plazo and intersects with the penal camp's intake. His formal title sits on letterhead from the SS Court main office. Investigating judge, empowered to pursue corruption, serious breaches of discipline, and killings tied to concealment of theft. The authority ran on paper from Berlin, through Franz Breithop's bureau, into regional SS und Polizeigericht. The method reads as procedure rather than drama. Offices are sealed, safes opened, ledgers seized, witnesses taken under guard to SS detention. When property disappears from WVHA pipelines or scandal threatens secrecy, a courier brings Morgan the file and a warrant follows. The Buchenwald line shows the clearest arc. Evidence of embezzlement and murder to cover embezzlement accumulated against Commandant Karl Otto Koch and members of his staff. Arrests and searches followed, and by April 1945, the SS had executed Koch under its own verdict. At Majdanek, audits and inquiries touched successive command staffs when property streams failed to reconcile with depot records. In Krakow, at Plazo, Morgan's team documented Goeth's diversion of valuables and extortion, resulting in his SS arrest in September 1944. These cases share a template: material loss to the state or party, abuse of authority, and killings insofar as they protected theft. They do not read as challenges to the regime's violence. They police its property and order. Numbers in Morgan's post-war accounts are broad and contested. He spoke of hundreds of investigations and scores of indictments. Surviving dockets confirm a substantial effort, but do not support a precise tally. The record is strongest where names and outcomes anchor it: Koch's execution, Goeth's arrest, prosecutions of select staff in other camps, and fades where evacuations erased logs in 1945. Unknowns remain: the exact volume of raids, the full roster of accused, and the proportion of cases that reached verdict before the front overtook the files. Limits appear in the margins. Where investigations approached policy, especially extermination and forced labor that ran as authorized programs, the path narrowed. Morgan's reach depended on cooperation from camp commandants and higher SS and police leaders. Resistance and delay increased as the war deteriorated. Some inquiries stalled, were diverted to lesser charges, or ended with transfers rather than trials. The system was willing to punish theft and scandal. It was not designed to indict its own purpose. The intersection with penal custody is visible in transport notes. SS men convicted through these cases went to confinement in arrest facilities or to penal camps at Danzig-Matzkau and Beneschau. Others were marked for Bewährung, probationary service at the front, while a thin fraction received death sentences. You can follow a single name from a seized ledger to a courtroom to a gate: an NCO stripped of rank for embezzlement, a driver sentenced for looting, a block leader charged with unauthorized shootings that disrupted labor. Their punishments remained inside the institution that created them. You close the deposition, and the paper smells of dust and glue. The next folder is a camp intake page listing new arrivals from SS courts by rank and sentence. A straight line runs from the judge's warrant to a barracks in Danzig or Bohemia, with a branch that leads, for some, not to release but to a rail car east, and a casualty entry that ends the file. A morning inventory counts shovels, picks, and wheelbarrows. The barracks smell of disinfectant and damp wood. Prisoners are SS and policemen under sentence, marched to labor details under SS guard. Records mention construction and earthworks. Precise task lists day by day are fragmentary. It is a prison for perpetrators, but its regimen looks like other camps: barracks, roles, punishments. The camp sits on the southern edge of Danzig, today Danzig-Matzkau, close to rail lines and SS installations. Its designation in files is consistent: Strafvollzugsliger der SS und Polizei Danzig-Matzkau, active from the first winter of the war until the spring of 1945. Jurisdiction runs through SS courts. Intake originates with warrants stamped SS und Polizeigericht, and deliveries are receipted by the gatehouse clerk. Exact capacities by month are unknown. Surviving fragments show fluctuating headcounts tied to sentencing waves and to drafts pulled for probationary duty at the front. You move with a column from barrack to Appellplatz. Roll call begins before daylight in winter. A guard sergeant matches names to a ledger. A second man tallies tools on a clipboard, each pick and shovel assigned to a pair. The men wear stripped-down uniforms or work gear. Rank insignia is removed or suppressed for the duration. Personal effects are minimal. Correspondence is limited to measured intervals under supervision, and visits, where permitted, are rare. The tone is administrative even at the level of socks and soap, which are issued and recorded. Work details leave through the gate in files of 4. Tasks documented in surviving reports are the hard labor that supports nearby SS and police infrastructure. Road grading and repair, drainage ditches, culvert placement, embankment stabilization, timber clearing, and foundation work for sheds or depots. The smell of tar and wet earth follows them back at dusk. The record is sparse on daily quotas but consistent about tempo and enforcement. Tools are recounted. Any loss triggers punishment entries. Where labor serves a construction project attached to the regional security apparatus, the paperwork cross-references to a project number rather than a narrative. Discipline bridges paperwork to pain. Penalties inside Matzkau include standing arrest on the parade square, reduced rations, beatings, and confinement in dark cells. A man can be docked food for a week for a lost tool or for talking in formation. He can be locked in isolation for fighting or refusal to work. Attempted escape or mutiny, under wartime emergency regulations, risks immediate execution, recorded in a terse line with a date and a phrase. Medical care is minimally documented. A sick bay is referenced, but treatment protocols, staffing, and outcomes are largely unknown. Deaths from disease, exposure, or abuse appear as numbers without explication in the fragments that survive. Intake and release describe the camp's role within the larger system. New arrivals come from SS courts across the Danzig West Prussia district and beyond, their offense categories familiar: theft of state property, embezzlement, extortion, rape, looting beyond orders, unauthorized shootings, desertion. Short sentences sometimes end inside Matzkau. Longer ones can be shortened by a transfer notation marked probation, pending manpower needs. When that order arrives, an escort detachment collects a draft, and the men move by rail to a training area or directly east for mine clearing and assault tasks. The ledger shows these shifts in a few strokes: transferred to probationary unit, date of departure, destination code. Outcomes return as gaps or as a final note: fallen in action, missing, returned, and sentence remitted. Segregation from the nearby concentration camp system is part of the design. Stutthof, the regional concentration camp for civilian prisoners, lies to the east along the coast. Matzkau houses SS and police offenders under sentence. The categories do not mix in custody. Yet the proximity of regimes is evident in shared materials, overlapping suppliers, and a common vocabulary of coercion. Fences, towers, roll calls, cells, and work. The distinction lies in who wears which side of the uniform, not in the mechanics of control. As Soviet artillery nears Danzig in early 1945, the routine collapses. Guards burn files. Columns form under orders that scatter inmates into evacuation marches, ad hoc battle groups, or disappearance without paperwork. Much of the camp's detailed history ends in smoke on those days, leaving archivists with intake pages that lack discharge lines and project numbers without completion notes. What endures is the contour, a penal facility that turns court sentences into labor and, for a portion, into calculated battlefield risk. A stamp hits purple ink in the gatehouse again, and a truck noses forward toward a job site that needs more hands. The next entry in the network lies to the south, past Prague, where a similar gate opens onto a gravel pit, a rail spur, and a roll call square with the same tool count and the same ledger headings. A truck backs to a gravel pit and men unload rails. Beneschau's penal inmates feed the SS training area in Bohemia with road work, entrenching, and facility construction. The files tie it to the SS training grounds around Beneschau. Distances are short enough to march. The camp's placement serves logistics first. The system grows where the SS needs labor and a handle on its own men. Beneschau lies about 40 kilometers southeast of Prague on a main line. Sidings branch toward depots and the SS Truppenübungsplatz that spreads over fields and low woods. In SS correspondence, the site appears as Strafvollzugslager der SS, unpolizei Beneschau, linked administratively to the higher SS and police leader in Bohemia, Moravia. The camp sits within reach of quarries, timber stands, and range earthworks. A gatehouse ledger records arrivals from SS courts, tool issues, and the steady dispatch of work columns to job sites stamped with project numbers rather than names. You step off with a detail at first light. A guard checks the tally. Shovels, picks, pry bars, saws, a handcart loaded with creosoted sleepers. Tasks in the surviving paperwork are practical and repetitive. Men grade and gravel roads to move trucks through spring mud, cut drainage ditches along range perimeters, lay short rail spurs for ammunition and timber, clear stumps where new huts will stand, and throw entrenchments and bunkers for training lanes. The smell is tar, wet earth, and disinfectant carried from the barracks. The pace is set by a foreman's watch and enforced by the guard's stick and the ration book. Discipline fits the legal frame that sent them here. Regulations note standing arrest, reduced rations, corporal punishment, and dark cell confinement for breaches. Lost tools, talking in ranks, slowing the line, fighting. Correspondence is limited. Visits are rare. The men are SS and police under sentence, not civilian prisoners. They wear work clothing and stripped insignia, and their movements track in a separate set of books from those of the nearby civilian victim camp system. The separation keeps categories apart while reproducing the same mechanics of control: wire, towers, roll calls, and work. The loop in the name is administrative as much as physical. Project orders originate with the training area. Labor columns complete them. New orders arrive with the next training course. Ledgers show transfers in both directions. Convicts return to units after serving terms, escalations to longer sentences, and notations for Bewährung, probation, that pull selected men for front-line drafts when manpower calls rise. Whether a given draft from Beneschau fed mine-clearing screens, ad hoc assault groups, or specialized formations is often untraceable in fragmentary records. The mechanism is clear where names are missing. By spring 1945, fronts converge. Evacuation instructions reach the camp. Files are thinned or burned. Columns form toward the interior. Some inmates are absorbed into last-ditch formations in the protectorate. Others vanish into marches without receipts. Exact rosters for these movements are unknown. What the surviving Czech and German archival traces fix is the function. Beneschau as a penal engine that turned court sentences into roads, ditches, huts, and for a marked fraction, into rail tickets east with remission promised only if they returned. A key turns twice in an arrest door at Dachau. It is not the prisoner bunker for concentration camp inmates, but a separate holding for SS men under internal punishment. Regulations restrict visits and impose drill and labor penalties. Short sentences can be served here, longer ones route to Matzkau or Beneschau. The proximity of training, incarceration, and mass violence is a single campus. The Dachau Standort spreads in rectangles of gravel and asphalt. An SS garrison with barracks, workshops, a motor pool, storehouses, classrooms for the guard school, and beyond a fence line and gates, the concentration camp with its own commandant's office, roll call square, and prisoner blocks. Within the SS side, an arrest facility serves internal discipline. Surviving site plans and post-war testimonies confirm its separation from the prisoner bunker. Exact floor counts, cell numbers, and daily occupancy fluctuate and are not fully preserved. The purpose is consistent in the paperwork: short-term custody for SS and police personnel under sentence, executed under the same insignia that trained them. Intake begins at a desk. You watch an instructor sergeant turn a ledger, enter a name, rank, parent unit, offense category, and sentence length. Then collect a belt, insignia, and any sidearm. The offenses that land here are the lesser and intermediate rungs of the SS disciplinary ladder: drunkenness on duty, misuse of vehicles, minor theft, insubordination short of mutiny, brief unauthorized absences, and assaults classified below felony. Men remain in uniform but stripped of privileges. Rank is suspended for the duration. Where a panel judge has imposed months or years, the delivery order points to Danzig-Matzkau or Beneschau. Here, time is measured in days and weeks. Routine is designed to punish through labor and drill. Reveille sounds early. Formations are separate from trainees and from guard details bound for the prisoner compound. Daylight hours fill with fatigue tasks that keep the standort running: hauling coal to barracks furnaces, scrubbing corridors, mending fences, dredging ditches, moving supplies from the rail spur, cleaning latrines, and repairing roads and walkways. Between duties, punitive drill tightens: extended marching with packs, weapons handling without live fire, kit inspections that end in sanctions for minor faults. Meals are basic and under strict arrest, reduced. Bread and water days appear in some periods. Correspondence is minimal. Visits require authorization and are seldom granted. Disciplinary charts on file list sanctions by hour and day. Standing arrest with rifle held horizontal, dark cell confinement, extra fatigue, and corporal punishment appear in regulations and recollections. Infractions inside arrest: talking in formation, lagging on a work detail, losing a tool, draw new entries in the log. A man who completes his term can be returned to his unit. Persistent breaches trigger recommendations for court proceedings and transfer to a penal camp. The steps are incremental and administrative. The same office that writes a week in arrest can, on a worse day, sign a transport to Matzkau. Geography concentrates functions in a few hundred meters. The SS training fields lie to the west. The Hebertschausen Range, used in 1941-42 for executions of Soviet POWs, sits a short drive away. The prisoner compound is across a controlled boundary. An officer can pass from a lecture room to an arrest inspection, and then take a perimeter post without leaving the standort. The archive reflects this adjacency in headers and stamps. Guard school, arrest company, commandant's staff, all on one letterhead or another, the same signatories recurring across different tasks. Paper trails are uneven. The Dachau Memorial Archives and regional collections hold references to the SS arrest facility and its use, but comprehensive rosters and architectural details are incomplete, especially for 1945. Evacuation and attempted document destruction in April left gaps. U.S. 7th Army records capture fragments of the garrison's administrative life, but not a full arrest logbook from the last months. Even so, enough survives to plot the structure. Arrest as the first rung, penal camp as the second, and wartime Bewährung, probation, as a lateral branch that could pull a man from a cell to a rail car east. You stand under a porch as rain needles the parade ground, and two columns move in opposite directions: trainees toward a range, penal men toward a tool shed. A clerk initials a page, turns the key again, and files the ledger. The proximity is the point. Training, punishment, and the administration of mass detention were contiguous tasks on this campus, and a decision at a single desk determined whether a sentence ended with a week in a cell or began a longer journey to a gate at Danzig or Bohemia. Winter tires chunk over frozen ruts as an escort detachment ferries probationers east in late 1943 and early 1944. Orders assign them to mine clearing, assault reconnaissance, or ad hoc battle groups. Casualty rates are high. The paperwork promises sentence remission for service. The front delivers mathematical risk. For some, this path leaves the ledger. For many, it ends the entry. The route begins in a remarks column where Bewährung is typed beside a sentence. A movement order follows from the SS Court main office to a camp commandant at Matzkau or Beneschau, detailing a draft size, destination, and reporting officer. An escort section collects identity tags and sealed effects. A roster is checked against the gate book. The train takes a siding at a depot tied to Army Group sectors, Center, North Ukraine, or North. Exact allocations varying with need and largely untraceable case by case in surviving records. The men remain in SS uniform with rank suspended. Their legal status is probationer, not free. Intake at the front attaches them to pioneer companies, assault platoons inside security regiments, or improvised Kampfgruppen. You stand on a frost-whitened verge as a sergeant hands out tools. Probrods, wire cutters, short spades, stakes, and white tape for marking lanes, demolition charges packed in canvas. Some drafts receive mine detectors, others rely on probing and visual cues. Tasks are defined in orders, as clearing lanes through anti-personnel and anti-tank belts, lifting booby traps from road verges, and leading assault parties across obstacles under covering fire. Equipment lists are utilitarian carbines, a few submachine guns, minimal packs, because speed and expendability drive the assignment. The work is procedural and lethal. A file advances in a staggered line, prodding for pressure plates and pull wires, cutting trip lines and blasting gaps where the pattern is dense. Where river crossings are ordered, probationers carry assault boats or wade first to sound the bottom for infantry behind them. In winter, frost locks fuses. In thaw, mud hides them. Reports filed after actions tally lanes opened, mines lifted or destroyed, casualties by hour. Precise percentages are unknown. The documentation that survives is clear only on the outcome categories that matter to the ledger: killed, wounded, missing, returned. Administration follows close behind. If a man survives a defined period or operation, a clerk at his parent court notes sentence remitted after probationary service and orders his return or reassignment. Some are expelled from the SS despite completion. More often in 1944-45, a signal comes back with a name and a date and the single word fallen. Others carry no detail beyond missing. The camp that sent the draft adds a diagonal stroke through each concluded line. For those still in the field, another draft order is already circulating, pulling a new column from a barracks that smelled yesterday of disinfectant and damp wood. By the time the snow turns to rutted thaw, the transfers have become routine. Trains in, columns forward, casualty lists out. The promise of remission is kept on paper. The cost is settled in lanes marked by white stakes and torn earth. At an evening head count, a pioneer sergeant stops on a blank where a name should be. The next segment in the files records what happens when men go missing, when discipline cracks under such loads, and how the penalties inside the penal system harden as the war unravels. Evening head count comes up short. A note in the margin records a desertion. Penalties inside SS penal custody include beatings and, under wartime emergency regulations, summary executions for attempted escape or armed mutiny. Files from 1944-45 show increasingly harsh enforcement as morale decays. The machine holds on as the war frays. The record of decay reads in short entries. A barracks ledger at Matzkau adds a diagonal stroke through a name, with the word for absence extended beyond hours. A work detail book at Beneschau lists a missing tool, and a day later, a sanction for the man last issued it. The next week, a transfer to strict arrest. As defeats accumulate on the Eastern Front, the remarks columns in penal camp files carry more notations for insubordination, refusal to work, and escape attempts from job sites at quarries and road cuts. The handwriting grows more hurried in 1945, the lines narrower, the outcome starker. Authority to kill on the spot hardens as the regime contracts. wartime criminal ordinances in force since 1939, and emergency procedures for front-line areas, authorized drumhead proceedings and immediate executions for mutiny, armed resistance, and desertion in the face of the enemy. Within the SS sphere, higher SS and police leaders and designated court officers can convene field courts. The resulting entries are brief: executed by shooting for escape attempt or shot after armed resistance. Exact counts by camp are unknown. Evacuations and burnings in early 1945 erased many logs. Surviving fragments show a rise in lethal sanctions as discipline falters. Inside the wire, the ladder of punishments is stepped up. Standing arrests lengthen. Rations are cut for longer periods. Dark cell confinement is more often applied. Beatings already in use become frequent responses to lost tools, talking in formation, or slowing on a work detail. Medical references are thin, usually a sick bay admission line with no outcome. Deaths attributed to disease or exposure appear without elaboration in year-end summaries where those survive. Most do not for 1945. The administrative tone does not change even when the penalties become final. At the front, probationary drafts face similar tightening. Reports from pioneer and security units in late 1944 note desertions from mine-clearing parties and ad hoc assault groups. The countermeasures include placing probationers under closer guard, pairing them with regulars, and threatening immediate execution for refusal to advance. Where a man disappears between the staging area and the task line, the paperwork at the sending camp is amended weeks later with missing. If he is detained by an SS field court, a signal may come back with a date and a place and an execution notation. Many files never receive either update. The causes are no mystery in context. Casualty rates in probationary assignments climb as the fronts reel. Food and supplies at penal camps thin under air attack and rail disruption. Guards face their own fear of collapse and respond with harsher measures. The system's purpose, control, secrecy, efficiency, does not soften under pressure. It contracts to its most coercive instruments. A man who might have served a short term in 1941 faces a transfer to a penal camp in 1943, and a fatal sanction for the same breach in 1945. A gate swings in the wind at dusk, and a guard stamps his feet against the cold. In the office, a clerk draws a line through another name and writes a single word that ends a file. The next segment opens outside the wire, where artillery draws close, bonfires bloom in yard corners, and the penal system that ran on paper and fear dissolves into evacuations without receipts. Sirens sound over Danzig as Soviet artillery comes within range. At Matzkau, guards burn files and assemble columns. Some convicts are pressed into last-ditch units. Some are marched out. Many fates go unrecorded. Beneschau experiences the same as the Red Army and U.S. forces advance from opposite directions. The dedicated penal system dissolves into flight and rubble. In March 1945, the East Pomeranian offensive drives on the Baltic ports. Danzig, held by remnants of Wehrmacht, SS, and police formations, is encircled and pounded. Inside Matzkau, ledger books with intake and punishment entries are torn from binders and thrown into oil-fed flames. A gate that once cycled men to work details now spits out marching columns guarded by men with carbines and stick grenades on their belts. Some drafts are diverted to ad hoc battle groups forming along approach roads and canals. Others are pushed west toward Gdynia or inland with no recorded endpoint. The date stamps stop before the city falls. The last lines read evacuated, transferred to troop unit, or simply removed. The paperwork gap is structural, not incidental. As Soviet troops close on Danzig in late March, the penal camp's administrative life ends in a bonfire and a whistle blast. Transport trucks, Opel Blitz if available, horse carts when fuel is gone, carry bundles of files to the flames, and then carry men out in the other direction. Which convicts are impressed into Volkssturm or SS alarm units, and which are marched away is only rarely specified. When the city is taken, on dates fixed in operational histories, there is no longer a gatehouse clerk to reconcile the intake ledger with a discharge page. South in Bohemia, Beneschau enters its final weeks under converging pressures. The Protectorate's rail grid clogs with withdrawals. The SS training area around Beneschau becomes a transit and assembly zone. By April and early May, orders move columns under guard toward the interior, some aiming west in hopes of reaching American lines, others simply clearing the path of approaching Soviet formations. Files are thinned or burned. Entries show evacuated without destination. The geography that once kept labor close now shortens evacuation routes. Columns pass the same gravel pits and range roads where inmates laid sleepers months earlier. The penultimate steps of the disciplinary ladder harden in this collapse. Field courts convene more often. Notations appear for execution after attempted escape during evacuation. More commonly, there is no notation at all. Names that were precise in earlier months end abruptly with missing, a date, and no place. Guards themselves fracture into fragments of retreating units or ditch uniforms. Post-war accounts from the region speak to movements, not to comprehensive rosters. Unknowns multiply where the files are ash. What can be anchored is the shape of the end. In Danzig, the penal camp's function breaks under artillery and fire. In Beneschau, it drains away under orders and roadblocks. The system designed to keep SS punishment inside the SS does not survive defeat. Its last acts are administrative reflexes: burn, march, reassign, shoot if needed. Afterward, investigators will lift a half-charred register from a ruined office, find a transport slip in a district file, or read a court stamp on a surviving warrant and try to connect lines that no longer meet. You stand at a gatehouse window clouded by smoke as a final stamp lands on purple ink, and the barrier lifts for a column that will leave no receipt. The next scene begins in a different light. Archive rooms and tribunal tables where surviving scraps, testimonies, warrants, arrest logs are sifted to reconstruct what the bonfires erased and to fix, if only in outline, how a closed system of punishment collapsed with the regime that built it. You open a Nuremberg folder and find Morgan's testimony, arrest records for Koch, and references to Girth's case. There are gaps where Matzkau's ledgers should be. Allied prosecutors mapped the SS legal system to understand its purpose and reach. Post-war Polish, Czech, and German archives add police prison files, but totals for inmates and transfers remain incomplete. What emerges is not a humane impulse but a bureaucratic self-policing. In the evidence room, the texture is onion skin paper, blue grease pencil exhibit marks, and cloth ties around bundles of captured files. The International Military Tribunal and later, the Nuremberg military tribunals assemble a scaffold. Decrees establishing SS courts in October 1939. Organization charts naming Franz Breithaupt at the SS Court main office, and investigative records linked to Georg Conrad Morgan's raids in 1943–44. The prosecutor's purpose is structural. They trace lines from the desk where warrants issued to the gates at penal custody and on into labor and combat drafts, documenting that punishment, when applied, protected secrecy and property rather than curbing authorized violence. Morgan appears in this map as both source and limit. He testifies about searches at Buchenwald, proceedings against Karl Otto Koch, and arrests in Krakow that removed Ammon Girth from command. His numbers for investigations are high. The courtroom record preserves his claims, but not every file he cites. Where documents exist, they show cases concentrated on embezzlement, corruption, and killings linked to concealment of theft. Where they do not, the narrative relies on secondary references and later national inquiries. The picture is firm at the edges of named cases and hazy in the middle. Polish archives in Krakow and Gdansk contribute fragments. District court references to SS custody. Police prison registers that note transfers to Matzkau, and post-war interrogations that list penal destinations in passing. Czech repositories in Prague and Beneschau hold material on the SS training area and its labor demands, with mentions of a penal camp feeding road work and range construction. German holdings in the Bundesarchiv preserve organizational papers from the SS court apparatus and WW2 audits that triggered inquiries. Across all three, the same whole remains. Complete intake and discharge books for Matzkau and Beneschau are missing, likely destroyed in March-May 1945. Allied analysts compensate by triangulation. Transport slips in a court file match a gate entry copied in a police ledger. A probation notation in a sentence lines up with a unit strength report at a pioneer battalion. A death date appears in a casualty roll where a penal ledger would have closed the line. The method is mechanical, and it allows counts by inference, not by total, evidence of operation without a definitive census. It also underlines the system's logic. When an SS man is punished, the documented trigger is disorder in the SS economy or discipline, not harm to those outside it. Museum curators and memorial scholars extend the work after the trials. Buchenwald exhibitions use Koch's case to show how internal justice reached for theft while leaving policy violence untouched. The Dachau Memorial publishes on the garrison's arrest facilities that ran beside the prisoner camp. Regional studies in Poland and the Czech Republic note Matzkau and Beneschau as nodes in a punitive network, even as they mark unknowns where bonfires made gaps. The result is an outline filled by names where they survive and by procedures where they do not. You close the folder, and the blue pencil number on its tab matches the index card in a wooden drawer. The next case file turns from courts to memory. Captions under stamps and gate photos that explain, in a few measured lines, how a system punished its own for breaking rules while demanding crimes as policy. A museum caption sits under an SS court stamp. The text explains a system that punished theft and disorder while industrializing murder. The phrase "too brutal even for the Nazis" collapses under the details. What counted as punishable brutality was usually what disrupted plans or diverted property. Memorial sites at Dachau and Buchenwald, and research on Matzkau and Beneschau keep this distinction visible. The legacy is technical and moral at once. A regime that built a prison for its own, without changing what it did to others. You stand before a glass case where a purple seal on acid-free board reproduces the masthead of an SS unpolizeigerect. The caption lists dates: 17 October 1939 for jurisdictional separation, 1943-44 for internal investigations, April 1945 for a commandant's execution under SS verdict. The object is a stamp, but the label reads like a map. It links a desk to a gate and then to a rail siding that sent men from cells to labor details or to mine belts. The language is spare: property, secrecy, discipline. It is a key to reading the rest of the room. At Dachau, display panels describe the SS garrison, the guard school, and the arrest facility that ran beside the prisoner compound. Photographs of the standort show barracks rectangles, a rail spur, and a fence line that carried two kinds of custody separated by a gate and an office. The materials highlight an internal ladder: short terms in arrest with drill and fatigue duty, longer terms to penal camps, lateral transfers to probationary units when manpower collapsed. The effect is to show function rather than redemption. The system did not correct character, it managed resources. Buchenwald's exhibitions use the Koch case to make the line visible. Visitors see a personnel file and a sequence. Audit discrepancies, raids by an SS investigating judge, a trial under SS law, and a sentence carried out days before liberation. The emphasis is not on moral epiphany. It is on the bureaucratic reflex to punish theft and scandal that threatened the apparatus. Where authorized violence swept prisoners into labor and death, the courtroom door stayed shut. That distinction, policy violence versus disorder, is the axis on which memory turns. For the penal camps that held SS offenders, the evidence is thinner and the work more archival. Polish holdings in Gdansk and Krakow preserve police prison registers that mention transfers to Matzkau. Check files around Beneschau to the SS training grounds by project numbers and labor demands. German repositories keep organizational charts and court papers. The totals for inmates and the full rosters of drafts into probationary units remain unknown. Curators and historians flag the gaps rather than fill them with invention. Where a ledger is missing, a caption says unknown. The phrase "too brutal even for the Nazis" survives as a headline, but the cases on the wall narrow its meaning to unauthorized or conspicuous brutality and to crimes that siphoned off property. That matters because it corrects a comforting myth. Internal punishments did not mark a humane faction inside the SS. They marked a conflict of interest judiciary protecting order, secrecy, and supply chains while leaving mass murder as policy intact. Understanding that prevents misreading and execution for corruption as a repudiation of the system that produced the corruption. Legal legacy threads the room in smaller text. Nuremberg prosecutors mapped the SS courts to show command and control. Later jurists drew a lesson that internal self-policing cannot absolve crimes against humanity. Evidence of an institution punishing theft did not mitigate its responsibility for extermination and forced labor. In post-war doctrine, independent oversight and external jurisdiction are the guardrails built where the SS tore them out in 1939. You move to a final panel where a map marks Berlin, Danzig-Matzkau, Beneschau, Dachau, Krakow, and Weimar. Arrows run between stamps and gates. The last line on the caption mirrors the files it interprets. The system punished its own to preserve itself. Nothing in that act softened what it did to everyone else.